Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro natural physique athlete, back with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the programming differences between beginners, intermediates, and advanced athletes for hypertrophy. I know that there are a lot of people from different levels of expertise on this channel. And in bodybuilding, your priorities for diet and training will actually change depending on your experience level. It's important for a beginner not to get bogged down in the advanced minutiae that might not actually make that much of a difference. And as one progresses from the beginner to the intermediate to the advanced level, you don't want to be carrying on your beginner programming because it will end up limiting your growth. Quick outline for today, I'm going to be giving you guys a blueprint for success. We're going to be talking about the diet and training priorities for beginners, intermediates, and advanced athletes in terms of hypertrophy. I generally define a beginner as someone who's been training seriously for about 1 to 2 years, an intermediate who's been training seriously for about 2 to 5 years, and advanced as someone who's been training for at least 5 years seriously. For more top-notch science-based bodybuilding content, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and let's get into it. Okay, let's start by talking about the priorities for diet and training as a beginner. We'll start from the training side, and as a beginner, you really want to be focusing on developing excellent lifting technique. Learning how to lift properly is crucial for getting the most out of your movements and preventing injury. Really try to understand your basic training anatomy in terms of the main muscle groups that you're trying to hit, and understand how those movements are targeting your muscles. If you don't know where to start, get help from a friend or another gym member. If you don't have a more experienced lifting buddy, you could hire a trainer. Lastly, filming yourself will also be really helpful. You can actually improve a lot by watching technique videos, filming yourself, and then comparing back to those videos. Next, as a beginner, you'll want to train with low volumes. And by that, I mean training with the lowest volumes that still optimizes your progress. As an absolute novice, for example, you might progress even with just one heavy set for your main lifts. This won't last forever though, and we'll talk about that later. Beginners usually don't need very much volume just because they're naive to the training stimulus. And in general, you want to get the most amount of gains out of the least amount of training as possible. This will reduce your chance of injury and will just be more sustainable in the long run. It's really important to set up your training and diet so that you don't burn out. Lastly, as a beginner, you'll want to focus on progressive overload using basic progression schemes. This ties into the last point here. So you can train with low volumes. Progressive overload should be your main priority in the gym. You want to be increasing your multi-set 6 to 12 rep max over time. Training with low volumes that optimizes progressive overload will get you most of your beginner gains. And to progress, I would focus on basic progression schemes like linear progression or double progression. Simple progression schemes like these are easier to run and will allow you to progress faster than a more complex method. Remember that you want to be programming in a way that allows you to progress as quickly as possible in a sustainable fashion. Moving on to the nutrition point of view. As a beginner getting into fitness, your first imperative should be to understand calories, macros, and portion sizes. Your overall calorie intake will be the main deciding factor in what happens to your weight. Macros will also be important to understand, especially protein. Start looking at your nutrition labels, looking stuff up on Google, or using apps like MyFitnessPal. And then tie back the knowledge of the macros and calories to the portion sizes that you're having. You want to start building your ability to eyeball macros on the fly. A lot of people don't understand that that healthy green smoothie that they got at the fitness shop down the street actually contains a lot of calories, and it doesn't keep them very full. So start building an awareness. Next, as a beginner, you'll want to run your first bulking and fat loss phases. Depending on where you're starting out and what your goals are, it is reasonable to start off with a recomp phase. Body recomposition is trying to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. But if you want the fastest progress, and especially if you want to take bodybuilding beyond the beginner level, you'll want to understand bulking and cutting. And guys, I do have videos on basically all the concepts that we'll talk about in this video, so you can just look things up on my channel afterwards. Bulking and cutting are the workhorses of bodybuilding. Okay, let's go on to intermediate training priorities. So as an intermediate or someone who's been training seriously for at least a year or two, you'll want to find your volume landmarks. Your volume landmarks are basically how much volume you actually need to progress, how much volume you need to maximize your progress, and how much volume you can actually recover from before actually stalling in progress. Volume can be approximated as the total amount of work you do in terms of sets, reps, and weight lifted. Note that as you go from the beginner to the intermediate level, most people will require more volume. This is why no cookie cutter program is ever really going to be optimal for you. Everyone's volume requirements will be different, and this will change depending on the muscle group. So in the intermediate phase, you'll want to start tweaking these variables. Next, as an intermediate, you can start to try more advanced training techniques. And by this, I mean intensity techniques like drop sets or myoreps, or other metabolite training techniques. As a beginner, I recommend people just keep things simple and really aim for progressive overload using basic progression. As a beginner, strength and hypertrophy training often looks very similar, and the two synergize. So I'd recommend that you focus on getting strong early on. But after you've been training for a while, it'll be time to start trying out these more advanced techniques. Lastly, as an intermediate, I want you to start to develop your mind-muscle connection. Your mind-muscle connection is basically how well you can feel the muscle that you're trying to target. This will take time to develop. As an absolute beginner, it's best to just focus on having really good technique. And if you're focusing on heavy compound free weight movements, you'll be hitting the right muscles anyways. For example, if you're doing chin-ups, there's really no way you can get your chin over the bar without using your lats. Okay, on to diet priorities for the intermediate. At this stage, I want you to learn how to mini cut. A mini cut is a short, aggressive fat loss phase designed to maximize fat loss while retaining or continuing to build muscle. These usually last between 2 to 8 weeks. As you build more experience and solidify good habits, it will be easy for you to get into a more severe deficit. When someone's doing their first cut as a beginner, I recommend that they start off with a more conservative calorie deficit. If you're not used to it, it will be hard to sustain a steep deficit, and you'll be more likely to go off plan and quit. Remember, consistency and sustainability are the most important factors when it comes to building muscle. So I've taken that into consideration when giving you these priorities. As you optimize your training and diet strategies as you get more advanced, you'll be able to cut more aggressively and not lose muscle. Next, as an intermediate, I want you to become good at eyeballing macros. We touched on this earlier where you wanted to start thinking about macros, calories, and portion sizes as a beginner. As an intermediate, you should have a good sense of the macros contained in common foods and to be able to estimate the macros when you go out to eat. Tracking meticulously for a while or following a meal plan can be helpful, but I don't want you to be doing those things forever. Getting good at eyeballing will be key in being more flexible as a bodybuilder. And think about counting macros as one of the main skill sets of being a bodybuilder. Okay, finally, let's talk about priorities for the advanced. This is where things get juicy. As an advanced athlete, one of the biggest changes that will happen is that fatigue becomes a limiting issue. That is, if you try to get all of your hypertrophy out of a whole bunch of squats, deadlifts, and heavy barbell compounds, you'd probably run yourself into the ground and reach a plateau in your gains. First of all, as an advanced bodybuilder, you'll want to emphasize mind-muscle connection. At this point, you should have a good feel of how to contract every major muscle group that you're training. You should know the movements that give you the best mind-muscle connection. And at this point, mind-muscle connection will actually become more important as a priority than the amount of weight you're lifting. As a beginner, I said that I wanted you to get strong, but as an advanced athlete, the amount of weight on the bar doesn't matter as much anymore. This is especially because if you're always lifting with heavy weights, you'll run into fatigue problems. Optimizing your mind-muscle connection will make sure that you get the most out of your movements. Expanding this concept, you'll want to maximize your stimulus to fatigue ratio. You can think of stimulus as how much muscle building signal you're getting out of a training session, and fatigue as how much recovery cost that training is producing. As a beginner, you can maximize your stimulus and not worry about fatigue, just because you're not lifting enough to actually max out your recovery resources. For example, as a beginner, if you were doing 5 sets of 10 on the deadlift with 135 pounds, that would be a great hypertrophy stimulus and you'd still be recovering pretty well. But say you were an advanced athlete deadlifting 5 sets of 10 for 405, that would be really taxing and might end up limiting how much total productive volume you're able to accumulate for your legs, your back, or for other muscle groups. At an advanced level, strength and hypertrophy training does diverge. Next, as an advanced athlete, you should be able to auto-regulate your training. You should be able to train to an RIR, or your repetitions in reserve, and have a good idea where you're at relative to failure. This is another major skill set in bodybuilding. You should be able to modify your training on the fly as needed depending on how you're feeling that day. Auto-regulation will make sure that you get the most out of your workouts, regardless of whether you're having a good or a bad day. As a beginner, it's often nice to just have a set program that you follow. But as an advanced athlete where fatigue really starts to play a big role, auto-regulation will become more and more important. Lastly, you might want to try experimenting with more complex periodization. Periodization is how you organize training and diet variables over time for optimal results. You might try more complex periodization schemes, or perhaps setting up blocks of training that are more focused on strength development or metabolite training. These are more advanced concepts, so I'd really only try these if you know what you're doing. From a nutrition angle, as an advanced bodybuilder, you should try to maximize your bulk to cut ratio. I've done a video on this, but your bulk to cut ratio is basically how long you spend bulking throughout the year compared to how much time you spend cutting. And ideally, you want to maximize the amount of time you spend bulking and minimize the amount of time you spend in a deficit. This is because a calorie surplus is very favorable to muscle growth. And at an advanced level, you might not build muscle at all if you're at maintenance or in a deficit. So your fat loss phases are kind of a waste of time in terms of muscle growth. Body recomposition is not going to be an ideal strategy for an advanced bodybuilder. To increase your bulk to cut ratio, you'll really want to make sure your bulks are lean bulks. That is, you're only gaining weight at the rate that allows you to maximize your muscle growth while minimizing additional fat gain. And you'll want to mini cut at the most aggressive rate of fat loss that allows you to preserve muscle. Hope that gives you guys a bird's eye view of the hypertrophy journey. Question of the day: what do you think should be the biggest priority for hypertrophy as a beginner? Let me know below. If you want to speed up your learning curve, check out my affiliate link for MASS in the description below. MASS is a top-notch research review run by some bodybuilding scientists that I really respect. They condense all the newest research every month and give you the executive version. If you really want to optimize your nutritional periodization, I think understanding the bulk to cut ratio is crucial, and it's something that no one talks about. Check out this video to learn more about this key concept. If you got value from this video, send it right now to one person you know who's into fitness, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.